Thanks, Tom, and obviously thanks to everybody for turning up today. Particularly, we have a couple of guys here from the media sitting over here, and are good friends of ours as well, so that would certainly help. We're getting the word out. What I don't want to do is to go through what Tom has already done. What I want to do is to read you an article that I wrote back in May 23. This is a true story. This was relayed to me by a member of the family. And when we get to the end of it, you're going to form two conclusions. You're either going to form a conclusion of sadness, or you're going to perhaps think, well, you know, this is a rising anger in me for what's happened, because what happens to these people is happening on a daily basis, and it's going to happen even more if we let the likes of the Vulture funds away with what they're getting away with. So that's pretty much the reason myself and Tom kind of got together, that we could actually formulate something. But the something was based on two words, and the two words were we call it one word for the moment, misrepresentation. And it was Ed Honohan, the Master of the High Court, and I'm going to say the current Master of the High Court, because he still is the Master of the High Court. Ed put those words in our mouths, and he put them there for a reason. He knew that we could use those words to damage the Vulture funds and essentially damage the financial system to some extent. Now, obviously, we're going to be very limited in what we can do in terms of getting right to the government on this, but we don't have to do that. The only thing we have to do is do, as Ed has said, is make a criminal complaint to the Gardaí, and you're claiming fraudulent misrepresentation. They're the two words that you use. They're the two words that will start closing down all these organisations that have been chasing a lot of you here. So with that, I'm just going to read you the story, and you make of it what you want, I suppose. 2 weeks before a group of masked men turn up at their home, Jim and Alison received a very official looking letter with the Irish harp emblazoned on the top of a brown envelope, confirming that they will be evicted from their home. Immediately, they looked at each other with some trepidation, guessing what the content was going to be before they even opened it. Hands shaking, Jim opened the envelope and slowly took the letter out. Tears began to form in his already red eyes tired and sore from crying and suffering from the lack of sleep. Alison looked on, her body began to shake, intensely focused on the letter, but fearing its contents, because she pretty much knew that it meant the family were now facing homelessness for the first time in their lives. Jim threw the letter on the table and told Alison to start packing. Alison screamed as if she'd heard about the death of a close loved one. She cupped her hands over her face, tears running through her eyes, sobbing at not just the loss of her home, but the loss of her security, which has been her home for over 17 years. She looked at Jim, her face as white as a sheet, shaking with a mix of anger, disbelief, and every other emotion that engulfs one when presented with such horrendous news. Alison, in a state of shock, asked Jim to go back to the court people who sent the letter and pleaded them for more time. Jim simply said it was too late and nothing was going to stop what they were planning to do now. Jim and Alison had been served with an ejectment order from the court. It meant they were going to be evicted, forcefully or otherwise. Alison rushed upstairs to the bedroom sobbing, distraught at the idea that they would soon be made homeless with nowhere to go. They had been reading about 14,000 plus families who had already nowhere to go or anywhere to call home. She looked everywhere for rental property in the locality, but found nothing affordable. She asked everyone she knew to keep a lookout for a property for herself, Jim and the kids. Absolutely nothing could be found. Panic like bile began to fill up her throat, and she vomited where she stood, as she realised the full gravity of the situation. She called her closest family members to let them know what had happened and asked if they could help. This is the first time that either Jim or Alison had said anything to anybody about their predicament because they were so embarrassed. They were afraid to turn up in court for fear that the neighbours would find out about the upcoming eviction. Fear of neighbours and embarrassment with their families kept them from attempting to save their home, or rather than trying to save it if a judge was in any way sympathetic. Noticeably, strange cars had been seen stopping inside our house a few times during the week. Every time Jim or Alison saw the cars, their heart leapt. They knew that these would be security men who were going to assist with the eviction, doing the drive-by surveillance of their home. Later on, a good friend of Jim's called him on his phone and told him he'd seen the local police inspector and a Garda sergeant sitting down with the same security men in a local hotel. These men were discussing the strategy for removing the family from the home, especially if they resisted. So 1 week on, with little or no time to sleep, not eating, telling their kids they're going on an adventure, telling the older ones they were selling the house and would find a new place to live soon. 12:30 p.m. Alison took the younger kids to the playground. The older ones were hanging out with their friends, very much oblivious as to what was coming at them. 2:15 p.m. Jim, unable to work that week because of the threat of eviction, put his tools from his man shed into boxes. Overcome with emotion and racked with guilt, Jim took a long blue rope out of a box on the floor. Jim had used the rope to tow his neighbour's car recently and had thrown it into a box, not knowing what it might be used for again. 2:45 p.m. Jim threw the rope over the rafters of his shed and tied it off so that it sat 2 feet from the ground. Jim then stood on a dusty old chair, put the rope around his neck and tightened the knot. His final thoughts allowed him to take the ultimate journey, as he knew that the life insurance policy was up to date and that Alison and the kids would be looked after. Jim took one last gulp of air and kicked the chair away. 3:15 p.m. Alison and the kids returned from the playground. The kids ran around the house looking for Daddy. Alison followed suit but couldn't find him. She took a look in the bedroom one more time and saw an envelope on the bedside locker with her name on it. Immediately upon opening it, she let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed on the floor. The kids ran in and in panic tried to wake Mammy. Their little 9-year-old boy then found his daddy hanging in the shed. The funeral took place 5 days later, and in the graveyard, 2 Gardaí in plain clothes stood off in the distance, watching, maybe wondering if their part in the eviction had played a part in Jim's suicide. This is the reality of modern day Ireland. It's the one that outsiders never get to see. The stress debt, in many, many cases, equates to death, as in D-E-A-T-H. And the thing would be is to ask Alison what that means to her and her children today. Now that's a true story. And that's it directly from a family member as to what happened. Obviously, I have this kind of surmise about Jim taking his last gulp of air, but that's normally what happens in a hanging. So, in essence, I don't see something a bit different here with our friend Jim. You know, maybe perhaps Jim would consider making a movie in the same vein as I, Daniel Blake, but with a happier ending that shows the directors of Vulture funds, debt servicing agents, lawyers and judges being taken out in handcuffs, escorted by prison officers, to happy music that makes you want to dance. I want to thank, there's so many people that got us here today. They've assisted myself and Tom to get where we are today. But I have to hold this to one man, and again, he couldn't be here today, but he's opened that door, as he said earlier, to what we call a momentous day, and to the many momentous days ahead of us. And we're unified, and we speak with one voice here. So I think everybody should put their hands together for the Master of the High Court, Edmund Holmes. I'd also like to thank our good friend Brian Riley for his access to people like Jim here, and the many other good people who've helped with the campaign. There's many others who've stuck with the crusade, as we call it, through thick and thin, and One of them, of course, is Tom Dorsey. Tom approached me a few months ago to help me get an article about his book, Irish Tears, into the States. And I did that, and Jesus, how I regret it now. But in all seriousness, Tom and I spent weeks perfecting the garden complaint. And eventually, after many nights and late nights and countless phone calls, we felt we got it right, and we did. And the proof is in the pudding with a Garda Pulse number in Tom's pocket. So Tom made history last Saturday with this. And just to say, I've done the same. I've also lodged a Garda complaint exactly on the same grounds as Tom has done. So what we need now is for every single person who's affected by the situation with Vulture Éireann, what we need to do is make that complaint. If you have that issue, you need to make that complaint. Don't waste time, don't do anything less than download the template that we've produced that people can use. Now we'll get that information for you shortly. But there can be no lone wolves with this. The template worked, the complaint worked, so use it, don't abuse it. So let's create this tsunami that we've been talking about for a long time, because this is the only opportunity and probably the last opportunity we're going to get to do this. So we have to do it right. So again, thanks for coming. Let's stay unified. If you're in trouble, definitely stay unified. And that's how we're going to beat them. So thank you.